using a setting which has a level of conflict over a period of time. When you just use free design, it can let you go off into um get lost in your own world, for example, and not end up writing your story. Found design is more that they is more for like interactive stories and like maybe D&D plots where it you find your locations and things like that. So make sure you have that distinction. Now, when we're talking about specific world design, and when it comes to actually designing it, um, the important things to think about are shape language and shape contrast. Now, if you see the presentation, I wanted to finish this thing, but I didn't um get to because of some life life got in the way, let's say. Um shape language is very important because it evokes the feeling of your world. um so if you wanted a very organic world, you'd use a lot of circles and shapes that have curves and very smooth kind of lines and things like that. But if you wanted to make a very rigid mechanical world, you would use a lot of blocks and triangles that make rigid and sharp shapes that would define your world very properly. So if you see in the picture here, there are a lot of triangular shapes and square shapes that define a very futuristic world. So you can see in the line art starting to emerge here. Um and yeah, um shape contrast is very important for like landscape building, um where you have a base shape, you have your base shapes, but you contrast it with an um opposite kind of shape. For example, if your world was very curved and things like that, your skyline and your clouds would be very linear afterwards. Motifs really links into shape language, where you got to keep a consistent type of shapes that you have. If you're using circles, continue using circles, but maybe change them a little bit, um, mold them to what you need and what you want. Um, in world design, there is a good thing to use is references. Like if you're doing like a medieval setting, make sure you reference the um the type of buildings from that time period, for
I'm
example.
sorry,
um
but this is not the time.
do sketches and things that emulate that type of time period. But you don't have to um copy it um exactly. You can change it and craft it to what you want, and make sure it's consistent in what you're doing. What is helpful is using silhouette drawings, is what which is what you can see here, where you just make a silhouette and start to line out some things that you um do in the setting, and line out uh some areas and objects that will depict your world. For example, I put this kind of spire here. Um, if you can see the spire, um, that makes a kind of futuristic um building. And what I was going to do here was involve a little bit of a green patch of grass, because the world has a combination of um futuristic stuff but a natural additive to the world, as they um use a lot of nature to balance out that world. Okay, character design. The written side. When you're creating characters, you should start by writing down some describing words for ideas for the character. You should define that and just write down your ideas and try and make the ideas interact and see what things you find out from doing that character. Um when you making a character, think about their personality, and you should think about what situations led them to having that personality, and define their character. Gender is a thing you could think of if you wanted to conform to normal things. Doesn't matter if they're male, female, transgender, non-binary, etc. And how their situations change, and maybe their identity changed, for example. A good thing to think about is a default mood. What if your character walks into a room, what are they like initially? Are they grumpy? Are they happy? Are they bouncy? Uh Things like that. Um Likes, dislikes isn't as important, and don't get too bogged down um with like very OC kind of thinking when you coming to character design. Um, but it would be nice to keep it consistent and maybe seed in things into your story, like a character consistently spits out olives and grimaces at olives when they eat them or taste them or something. Um, flaws are very, very important when it comes to character design. Um, Especially when in this like type of internet age, when it comes to OCs and stuff. Um, make sure you don't make a Mary Sue where everyone loves them and all their character traits are amazing and they're OP and overpowered. Um just make sure you add in some things that makes them more human and more relatable to people. For example, my main character Bullet for my story is Strina Genesis. How he's a very powerful character. Um However, he's just a big kid, let's say. He's very naive, um quick to anger, very temperamental, very emotional. Um and he doesn't realize him in itself, but he's a big guy, but that grew up too quickly, let's say, and he's still in the mind of a teenager, let's say. Um um I see in the chat people saying like character voice. Don't get too bogged down with that. It might be nice in description. It is always fun to like um listen to songs and have your canon voice, but it's not that important, but it's fun to do, I'd say. Um Character design. Um Shapes and shape language are also important with character design. Let's see this character. um a very This is a very innocent and nice character, optimistic, and he has a very rounded shape, very um curves, and a nice imagery in that. um Using circles evokes an innocence or a niceness, and um creates shows that type in characters. Cubes and squares are more straight-laced characters, are very regimented, um or just plain. um Triangles evokes a sharpness in a character, an edginess, if you will. um Sharp shapes would a show that kind of hardness in a character. Flow is also very important. It drives your eye to the character. So if you can see in this character on the screen, the direction that they're pointed at all leads up to their face. Um and when in character design, oh, oops. In character design, that's very important to lead up to the character's face. Um and make sure your oops. Make sure the everything's flowing to the main features of the character. For example, the character's main feature here is their double ears and their horns and their very purple eyes. Gesture is also important when in character design. Make sure um their stance evokes what their character is. For example, this character's standing head on and very bright eyed, and shows their determined nature, and their very confident their confidence in themselves, and they're holding out the big sword, maybe compensating for something. Not that type of thing. Don't no. Um threes are also important in character design. Which is they should have three elements that um your eyes are drawn to. For this character it would be their big ears, their horn, and their big sword. And threes are a very organic number that you can see in everywhere. And um it helps draw your eye and helps keep that character interested. Don't over design your character. It just makes it uh hard to look at. And especially when you're creating a story or creating a comic, for example, you don't want to be looking at too many things at the same time, or else it'll be distracting from the story. Theme and setting. Make sure you add your theme and setting into your character. For example, this character has a very kind of laid back but like futuristic kind of uh futuristic um clothing, showing that they're in a kind of futury setting, but they have a very ripped scarf that they're wearing, showing that maybe they don't live in that particular type of place. Um okay. When we go into storyline and blocking, um make sure you have an end goal. Don't make your storyline wishy-washy and going everywhere and not coming to an end. Make sure you have a definitive end goal so that um everything is every part of your story leads up to that end moment. um when you're making that your story, compile your ideas and make sure you disregard incontinuities. um don't delete them, as I said before. Just put them somewhere else and make sure your story um flows together and has a clear progression. A good thing to do is separate your story into overall arcs, um and make sure your it has points that define your the progression of the story. and integral parts that make sure you see there's a progression in your story. Um, Moral arcs are very important. It for indie creators, it's not necessary, but it makes your story much more human and relatable. So an example of this, um maybe your character starts off as a immature brat, um and he or she or anything in between um thinks they can do whatever they want, but realize over time that they need to conform to um to the people around them and make sure they are considerate of those around them and understand that maturity is a good thing, and they um expand their maturity. Again, write it all down. Don't write it all down as I written here. Write it all down, um, and make sure you have written your arcs and your mini, maybe your sub storylines, subplots for each each chapter or each volume, and make sure it doesn't get too complicated. Make sure it's clear and defined, and it's a clear progression that you see over time. Something you could add is secondary storylines, something that are seeded into the background of your story. Um, Stuff that is seeded through like world building and stuff. Um, for example, your main story could be about a character that wants to um go to um go to an army like place and prove themselves and that they're a big person, while the secondary storyline is that um they they mature as a person, and they um they find out stuff about themselves, and it's seeded throughout their world, and their world as a whole develops. Now, when we get into writing itself, when we're talking about if you're writing a book, the basics that will get you far is the starting hook. Now, um it's very important when you're creating a story that you start with something that grabs your reader in. So I'm going to read you an extract of my story from the first chapter that I made sure that I made a very interesting hook before I started the story. All right. So here it is. Reality. What is it? Is it only determined by what you see, touch, feel, and smell? Restricted by these rules and regulations that that to you say what is possible and impossible. Structuring your choices through thoughts and through truth. But have you ever thought of a world beyond that? A world that is beyond logic and conventions? A world that cannot be easily explained through science or tested or can even be recreated? A world pushing the limits of reason, form, and structure with no real reason to. That is my reality. I am Bullet. This is my story, my possibility, and my truth. Right. So that is a hook. You don't have to go that far, by the way. um, I just wanted to create a bang, and this was in the time where I was doing a lot of creative writing in school. So I just wanted to create a very something that would hook you in, and grab you buy the collar and make sure you read um the book. So you don't have to create something as philosophical as that, but just start the ground running and make sure that your reader's hooked in. um when you get into writing, the main things are varied sentence structures. Don't start with um let's say the character's name is Flit. Flit went this way. Afterwards, Flit went to the store. Flit also went and bought some groceries. Flit went and did some sightseeing. It gets boring after a while, and that's an issue with things like fan fiction. Um they don't really care about how they interest the reader. Well, not all, obviously, but when it comes to like a typical indie creator, they don't really think about how they start their sentences, and it gets boring after a while. Also, something, not too long sentences. I had an issue with this with my description, where I would make my descriptions go on and on and on. And the rule of thumb is do whatever you can say in a breath. Don't go any more than that, or else the reader will start getting exhausted. Um, that's how you go about that. Intriguing description. Now, this is my favorite part. Um, if you have very nice in description, it will entice the reader, and it will also help with your world building within your story. It will help your reader see what is around them, and get them very much in the story. If I read another extract here. Evening. The air was crisp and fresh. In the around breeze blew with a slight dampness in the air. Dew-frosted windows littered a wide labyrinth of tall city buildings. Twilight shone through the spaces between the shadowed clouds, covering the sky, making the roads grow a dim purple, reflecting and refracting through the puddles and dark windows. The hundred of ghostly clouds covering the sky made the roads abnormally dark for an unusual night and a cold storm. I won't read any more than that, but that is the type of description that you could go with. Um, don't make it too complicated. Don't whip out the thesaurus. Don't use words that you don't understand. That's a very typical mistake that people use, because sometimes it just doesn't work. And you don't want to get your readers bogged down with massive words that they can't read. um Pacing. Pacing is so very important. Make sure that if your story is a quick story, you hit the ground running and start straight into your story. If your story is a slow burner, start with um start with description, and let it take its course, and don't make it long but not too long, obviously. um and just make sure no sections get too short, no sections get too long as the reader can digest the information that you're giving to them. Not explained, obviously, again. um but make sure that um it is paced in a way that your reader can digest your information. It's cliche, but read. Reading is amazing for your description and amazing um for your writing, because you see from many different creators their styles of writing, um and their the way they write, and you can see how they use language to describe their worlds and describe their characters and describe the experiences that they have. So it just helps. You don't have to do a lot of reading. Don't do it to make you upset. Don't get yourself bored, but just do a little bit of reading. It will help you with your writing. For a comic and webtoon basic comic helps. Pacing is so important. Like, as I said before, don't bog down your readers. Don't explanation dump them. Don't take too long in sections. Um, Make sure it keeps your the paces kept moving, and um there are ups and downs, high points and low points, breaks in action and stuff. um m- Pacing is so much more important in um visual medias, because it's it it draws your attention as much as it can let your attention slip away. um for comics, very much need to use dynamic panels. Although you can do it very unrigidly and normally, dynamic panels are very drawing to the eye, and um it keeps the reader on the toes, and it keeps it interesting. For example, if you had a normal panel, maybe the character is overlapping the panel, for example, breaking it up into sections, or making a wider panel for showing depicting a big world and giving a sense of scale. For example, having the character small, or maybe a wide lens, for things like that. Not too many sound effects you should have in comics. Make sure it's very balanced. Also look to other comics for this. Um Make sure that if they're used, they're not big and taking away from the characters themselves. Um you need to make sure the sound effects are just there for effect, as it in the name. Not too much writing should be in the in your speech boxes. um when you're explaining things, not when you're explaining things, when you're talking, don't delve into paragraphs and paragraphs of writing. They should be a few sentences at most. um it really depends on what you're doing in that panel, but don't let it go on for too long. That's the basics of comics and webtoon. Now, animation. I am not a professional in any way in animation. I haven't done any. I've done a little bit of animation, but it's nothing crazy. But I at least know the basics. Obviously, when animating stories, no matter what, it will be a big project. So if you're gonna do an animation, invest the time in it for quality. Um, because it's going to take a long time anyway. Try to make sure you know the basics of animation, you know how to do things like walk cycles and backgrounds. Um, and if it's a multi-person project, make sure everyone is um, knowing what they are doing, and make sure all the pieces fit together good. Make sure you make a good script for your animation if it has voice acting. Um, it needs to make sure that everything's paced well, obviously. That your sentences are very organic and sound like people talking. Don't make it robotic, or um make it overly exaggerated so no one can relate to the characters. When in the voice acting itself, make sure you can get the best mic you could possibly use. Obviously, not everyone has the access for funds for this, but try and invest in a good mic. Um, and make sure your voice acting is as good as possible. It's very jarring when there's bad voice acting um in an animation. Obviously, you don't have to be a professional by any means, but if you um look at some tutorials, take some acting classes help a lot with voice acting because it's basically the same thing. Make sure you're expressing yourself when you talk. Right now I'm doing a lot of hand movements that help me um to talk, um and it makes your voice acting more organic. um if you're um saying a happy line, for example, maybe smile and do it physically when you're doing the voice acting. Good sound effects and good sound design. um Try to do research on it, obviously. Like, I'm not a professional in that, but I know you can get a lot of good sound bites through different websites for free. You can always use YouTube converters for sound. um Obviously, when you're using sound, make sure you're not infringing any on anyone's copyright. Make sure it's free to use and copyright free and stuff like that. Or if you get a license for it and it's a big project, you get license for it. Pacing, obviously. I won't go into that again, but pacing is even more obvious when it's bad in animation. Um yeah. Now, when we get into the final stages of creating your story, you're going to think about release options. I'm going to go through all the free ones right now. Um uh in for writing books, if you want to do like a proper book, you can go into Amazon self-publishing. That's all free. They will You will put in your manuscript script and put your cover in for free, and they will put it on the site, and people can buy it and print it. Amazon will print it for you, and you can people will buy your books that way. This week, through research, I found this is another free website that you can upload the manuscript to your book, um, and um, and release it that way. For comics, the two ones that I know of right now are Webtoon and Tapas. Webtoon is a if you don't know what Webtoon is, it's just a site where you can read free webtoons for free, and you can upload them for free as well. Um, yeah, it's a very PG one. Um, all of the things are PG. If you want to do something that has more adult content in it, Tapas is one you could use. You can use it for normal ones as well. Um, but Tapas has a wider range of things that you can upload. Tapas also has a feature where you can put books into it as well. Um, which is another thing that I will use soon when I'm releasing the full version of Astrina Genesis. Now, animation, the only thing I know of obviously is YouTube. Um, you're gonna have to need like I don't know how much subscribers it is you need to make money off it if you want to make money off it. It's like 100,000 subscribers, I think. If you want to make money off your animation. Um, yeah, YouTube is a good platform for many people over the world to be able to view it. Um, Everyone knows of YouTube, obviously. Um, there aren't many video sharing platforms that are as big as YouTube, but if you wanted to, if you really wanted to, you could use Vimeo, which is another video sharing platform. And there are others, of course, like Facebook and thing, but I don't think you can make money off of that. All right, that's about the end of my panel. So if you have any questions that I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. I'm not a professional, so I don't know everything, but I'll try and answer as many questions as you would like. Yeah, I appreciate all the thanks. I very much enjoy storytelling and writing and stuff like that. Since secondary, where I started doing like creative writing in English literature and English language. Um, Finding your distinctive style. Um, right. That's a thing that obviously, if you always want to come to these things quickly, but it's just not something you can do. You just need to do it through iteration and writing and drawing continuously and consistently um to find your definitive writing or art style. Um, it's not something you could come across, you can rush to, but it's something that you shouldn't want to rush to, really. Just enjoy the ride and not the destination. Um, like my art style right now and my writing style is not final in any way. I don't see it being final for a while. Um, there are heights that I want to reach and levels that I want to reach, that I always want to improve on. So I think you should just think about improving and let your style um grow as you grow as a writer and creative. Any more questions? Oh yeah, I've gone 5 minutes over. Um I appreciate everyone listening in. I'm very hot right now. I'm sweaty. I'm in a kigurumi. Um, um, I'm finally enjoying my stay at Othercon because I've been doing a lot of home improvements recently, so I haven't had time to very much engage in the activities. But I have listened to a few panels. Well, I hope everyone has had a good con so far. I know I have. Um, I hope everyone's had a good good time in this panel. So I think I'll finish. If no one has any more questions, I'll finish. Yeah. All right. Thank you for listening and goodbye.